probably have seen lots of signs for Crossman Company in various places around Florida, around the Southeast, big in retail, leasing, and all sorts of things. John has been very active in with Valencia, UCF, board trustee. There's so many things. Believe me, I wouldn't be bored listening to it all. But he's also an author, and he's a really big advocate for young people. And he wrote a book last year called Career Killers, and I would encourage everyone to get a copy of this. My son is in the process of reading it himself. I've passed it along to a number of people. But as much as it is for teenagers and college-bound people, its lessons are very real for anyone in their career. So I would encourage that, and if you could give us a link to Amazon to order it, that would be great. But John spoke last year. It really opened my eyes to how the real estate world connects so strongly to business here in Florida. And he's going to take that a step up with this next presentation. So I'd like you to welcome John Crossman, CEO of Crossman Company.
Thank you. And sorry for all my props here. So I got all this different stuff. So how you guys doing? Good. And I brought some copies of my book. All these books I have here are giveaways, except you. I have one reserved for you because you asked. But all these stuff are giveaway. You got my clicker?
I'm not sure if this is the one, but I might have to be your stand-in.
Do you mind doing that, or
yes,
okay?
Fine.
All right. Well, first off, just real quick about Crossman Company. We had big news this week. We opened an office in Charlotte, and so that was a big thing for us to grow. It's funny to me how we've been doing business in North Carolina for 7 years, but man, if you open a physical office, that's like a big deal. So I'm not really going to talk much about my business and what I do. I might touch on it slightly. What I really wanted to kind of get into is the economy and where it's headed, and I wanted to take a slightly different perspective. So when I was thinking about this, I started thinking about if the economy started heading down, what are things that we need to talk about to prepare us for that? And when I started doing research on things I might say about that, I emailed some series of key people. I emailed my favorite college professor, who I'm still in touch with, and I emailed my stockbroker. That's a good person to ask. I emailed a friend of mine who's an engineer, and I emailed somebody else smart, I don't know, somebody else. And so I just said, what do you think? What would you tell this group? And the responses I got back were very consistent, and things you might think about, obvious things like, hold on to cash and, debt and be away from debt, things like that. And they're all kind of good advice. But what I want to get into is some other kind of deeper things, a little bit different perspective of things we can do, assuming that the economy might be slowing down. Is that okay as far as just a setup? Okay. Now, the other thing I want to say is that some people accuse me sometimes of being too optimistic and sort of an optimistic person. That said, I really try to be a realistic person in the way I kind of try to approach things. And I'll give you an example of that is the subject of race. So I do a lot of lectures about civil rights. I do a lot of work with historically black colleges, and that's a big part of who I am. My dad was a civil rights leader, so I like to talk about that. So sometimes people will say, oh my gosh, racism is so terrible in this country, it's as bad as it's ever been. And I'm like, man, there's no way that's true, right? Things are they're way better than when I was a kid. That doesn't mean we don't have problems, right? But things are better, right? So I try to have a realistic perspective. So anyway, so all these are going to be my observations, so I hope it's helpful. So let's go and go to the first slide. All right. So I like this picture because this is who I want to be when I'm 70, okay? I want to look like this guy. And I saw a YouTube video the other day, and it was a 90-year-old woman doing yoga, right? And I was like, that is so cool. So whenever you see somebody that's older and super active and in good shape, that's always so inspiring. But here's the first point I want to make is when you look at that guy and you think, I want to be that guy, or I want to be the 90-year-old woman doing yoga, you can't start getting that kind of shape when you're 67, right? You got to start now. That doesn't happen overnight. That is a long, long, long process. And of course, when you see health issues, a lot of times people are older and they're really overweight and they got sort of severe kind of health issues. It's hard to then, you can't get those years back. So when we start thinking about we're trying to prepare for an economic downturn, Well, we need to start getting in really good shape now, right? So the visualizing the years ahead and what are all the things and things that we need to do to kind of get in physically shape now, those are important things to think about, even when times are going good. So the first thing I want to tell you about that is, for me, as far as getting good shape, what does that journey look like? Well, last year, about this time of year, big year. It was a big year for me. A lot of things happened. One of the things, I got one of the CEO of the Year awards from the OBJ. That was a big deal. I got the Humanitarian of the Year award from the African American Chamber. Like, sort of high points in my career right this time last year. But it was also right at the time this year that I was doing this presentation, and when we did the prep for this presentation, we had like a speaker's rehearsal kind of thing. And in that is when I saw Ray speak for the first time. And when I saw Ray speak, now let me just back up and say this. In the prior year to that, I had really been feeling like I needed to join a CEO group. All the stuff, all the leadership stuff in my life, I'd never done that. I'd been researching, I'd been checking some out, I'd been kind of building towards that. But when I saw Ray speak in the rehearsal, it was like he was speaking to my soul. Like he was hitting some points about my company that were weak, some painful, and I was like, man, I need to lean into that. And so what I did was, after this last year's meeting, is I joined his group, and I joined his group in a significant way. And on top of that, I started using Ray mentoring me on some different things. And I've had some tough issues, and I'll talk about that in a bit, where Ray has come in and stepped in on those. So even those from the outside, somebody might look at me and look at my company and think, man, Crossman, they're doing good, they're growing, he's getting these awards, things are great. Man, things are not great for that guy, I'm sure, on some level, right? There's always issues that we have. And so the thought process to have outsides look in and go to professionals. I'd say another one is just the case of having mentors, right? Mentors and people we see. And recently, one of my biggest competitors retired, which is awesome, right? Like, get him out of the way. I'm meeting with him next week. And I actually said in the email, I said, I want to get your advice. I'd like to pay you for your advice. Like, I'm going to lean into that relationship. I want that advice, okay? I'll also go ahead and say this. This is different, but it's related, okay? I have teenage daughters. They're 13 and 15, and they're awesome. By the way, yes, I did have Valentine's gifts for them this morning. I took forever to get everybody in the bed last night so I could get up and get get all the gifts already. I had a thing for my wife, thing for my 15-year-old, thing for my 13-year-old, and a thing for our Great Dane. Come on, absolutely. She deserves it too, right? But here's the thing in my household. Every single Saturday at 11 a.m., we have a standing meeting with the counselor. There's an 11 a.m. meeting every Saturday with a counselor. And my rule is that whoever the family needs it gets it. Now, a lot of times it's the girls. It's usually one of them. Sometimes it's them together. Sometimes it's one of them. Sometimes it's one of them and me, or sometimes it's one of them and my wife, right? He might say, gosh, are your kids bad kids? No, my kids are great kids. They're wonderful kids. I love my kids. But they're teenage girls. And sometimes the issues they're going through, particularly in today's world, there's things I don't understand, and my wife doesn't understand how to relate to them, right? The social media, the technology, things that are on them, I don't always know how to process. I'll tell you a beautiful thing about the counseling. Beautiful. My wife called me. I was out with some friends and just having some lunch. It was a football game or something. And she had gone with my 15-year-old to the counseling session. And during the counseling session, the counselor looked at my wife and said, you're wrong on that. You need to apologize to her. And my wife apologized to my 15-year-old daughter. And I was like, Angie, man, that is awesome. That's like oxygen to give to that child. So cool, right? So a couple weeks later, I was picking up my 15-year-old daughter from the counseling session. The counselor said, hey, she's requested you come next week. And I said to my 15-year-old, I said, come on, let's just talk about it now. And she goes, no, we'll wait. And we waited a week. And then I went in there and she talked about some issues she had with me. Now, it wasn't crazy, it was just life. I mean, it was important to her, but I did apologize to her in that. So in the same way, I go to Ray, and Ray has said some things. Ray has said very hard things to me, as have some of our contemporaries have said hard things to me. Learning that and building that skill set's really key. So if we want to be in great shape, like if we want to be Tom Brady, we need to first find our, what's his name, Belichick, right? We got to find that, and we got to seek those out. And that might be a group of people, because it might be one specifically to our industry, it might be counselor and personal skill sets, but it also is somebody who also understands those dynamics and leaning in on that, okay? So, all right, let's go to the next slide. So some stormy clouds ahead, right? So when I travel, and I like to ask people, what do you see as signs? Like what's out there? I'm always like trying to look for that thread. And different people have different perspectives of why they think things are going to turn. And there's a lot of obvious ones, runs that we're kind of overdue. Some people might say that. But I wanted to give you a couple of quick things. These are just my little perspectives of things I find kind of interesting. And they're personal, so take what's worth, but it's been helpful to me. So last year, I had a gal working for me, and I'm just going to be very open, these numbers. We were paying her about $75,000 a year for the job she's doing. And she's good at her job. I wouldn't say great, but I'd say good. She's a good worker. She got offered a job that was less of a job at another company. And it's not a competitor. It's similar, but a little different. And with that company, thank you, they offered $120,000 a year. So we lost that employee to that company. Now, I will tell you the problem with that is if that company had called me and said, John, can you find us somebody to do this job? I could have found him something for 60. So she took a less job with another company at 120. That's weird. And then I lost another employee who got another job, really cool job, but he got basically offered double what we were paying him, right? And his last day he cried because he loved his job with us. But how do you advise somebody to turn that down? Like you can't. People got to do that. So I've seen that trend, and that's weird and concerning because you're like, that seems like anomalies. It's like back in 2007, when a dental hygienist told me she was flipping condos, you're like, that happened and that's not right. Well, that's weird, right? So here's the other weird thing. These are just my observations. I was in New York in December at one of the largest real estate conferences that I go to, and I met 5 different people I know who are between the ages, I'm 47, they're probably like my age to 61, in that range, pretty high profile ranges. I'd say all 5 all-stars, just gold star people at the top of their game. All 5 either had been laid off or were looking to make a change. And I thought, I have never seen that many senior people in my life at the same time either out or looking to make a move. And I thought that was weird. And here's where it got weirder. Last week, I got a call from a friend of mine, and I kid you not, in my industry, he is the Tom Brady of my industry. I fundamentally don't know anyone in the business that better, more ethical, smarter, harder working to make every single box. His total comp plan was right at 7 figures, got laid off 10 days ago. Now think about it. The gal that's getting 75 is now getting 120, but the guy that's getting 7 figures is now getting 0. That's weird. What's going on with that? Well, I saw that because I was like, he works for a major REIT, major owner of shopping centers across the country. I think they see storm clouds ahead and they're cutting costs, okay? So he and I have just sort of going through, like, just talking through what do we do, how we deal with that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But in my mind, that's the kind of stuff I try to look for. Now, on the other hand, I just want to point this out. My company handles 400 shopping centers in 8 states, close to like 30 million square feet of shopping centers. One of the things I look for is no pays and slow pays, right? Like, if you just all of a sudden if you had a trend, if every single nail salon started paying slow all the time, you'd be like, well, that's concerning. There's no trend of that. I have no trend of that. There's no problem. And you might say, well, John, what about Amazon? I'd say, well, we talked about that last year, so we don't need to talk about that now. But I also tell you that a lot of our shopping centers have medical uses, all kinds of uses, restaurants. And, it's so funny, I have to say this, restaurants and Ross. Let's just talk about Ross real quick. Ross does great, and where we have Ross, they've done very, very well. And I was looking at a shopping center the day that had Ross in it, and I was driving the market, and I was thinking to myself, I don't think anyone in this neighborhood is ordering Amazon and having packages left on the front steps. Not every neighborhood's a neighborhood where you're going to leave stuff on your front porch when you're not home. You know that? Like, there's a whole demographic of this country that works hard and spends money and is not going to do the Amazon thing. And there's retailers that are going to do fine. Does that make sense? Right? So I was like, so I look at it and I go, there's a lot of things to be positive about, but there's still some stormy clouds I want to be mindful of. Okay? Go to the next slide. This is just, what I like about this is when I think about, the economy coming up and having, a lot of things going on, don't go crazy. Don't go run around. Don't panic. And I have several books here I want to reference. And the first one is, this one, is How to Survive the Economic Meltdown. Have you guys ever heard of this book? Pat Moore, this is a Christian book. I'm going to leave this here if anyone wants a copy of it. So it does have churchy stuff in it. I'm not trying to be pushy, it's from my library, so that's my context. But he wrote this book during the last economic meltdown. It's funny, I actually led a Bible study about this book and sort of trying to pick things for how do you survive an economic crisis. And one of my favorite parts about this book is he talks about his own experience going through an economic crisis. And he said that when he was going through it and he was looking at bankruptcy and all this stuff, he talked to his father-in-law about it and was saying, hey, I'm looking at this, economy's bad. And his father-in-law looked at him and said, you're going to get through this. And he said immediately he felt so much better. He just felt like a weight, like, oh yeah, I'm going to get through this. And then his father-in-law said, but you have to go through it. And then the weight came all right back on, right? You know. But so the reality is, it's like we have to go through economic downturns. We're going to go through them, but we'll get through them, okay? And as CEOs, we have to be at the helm, you know, and we got to stay calm and avoid panic. Don't rush to anything. It's like, you know, when you're driving your car and a squirrel comes out, if you do this, you're going to die. If you do this, you're going to be okay. Squirrel, not so much, but you'll be fine. Just don't overreact, right? And so I just like this as a resource, as a reference point. The other thing that he mentioned in his book that really stuck out to me was he talks about communication. And so one of the things that he did when he was going through his tough time was he called his bank every single Wednesday. So they were looking at foreclosing on him and all this kind of stuff. So even if he had no updates, he called him every Wednesday. Now, when all this was going down, or when that book came out, which again was 2008-ish, I was at a real estate conference down at Champions Gate. I was there with the University of Florida. And I'll never forget, I was walking out, my wife called me and she said, John, I don't know if you heard this in the news, but Steve got murdered. And I was like, Steve, what? You know, like, he got murdered? It's crazy. Winter Park real estate guy got murdered. And I got my car and I called our managing partner. I was partners with Steve in the deal. We built some apartments by Mall Millennia. And the other partner's name was Steve, and so the second Steve was like, I can't believe this Winter Park guy got murdered. Well, 24 hours later, he wasn't murdered. He committed suicide. And what had happened was he was stealing our money. You know, we had money with him in a good deal. He had a bad deal. He was moving the money over. He was got to get busted. So he committed suicide. We think he tried to make it look like he was murdered or some kind of crazy thing. And so it was a mess. I mean, it was a mess on every level, right? I mean, I thought this guy was as perfect a partner you could think of, and clearly a lot of demons, a lot of bad stuff going on. So the second Steve, good Steve, now is in charge of this just terrible situation. So Steve actually had read this book, and here's what Steve did. And it's just like a simple, but it was a genius move. Here's what he did. Steve wrote a letter to all of the investors in that deal. Imagine how stressed we were, once a week for 1 year. Every single week, letter from Steve. The next year, we got a letter once a month for 1 year, okay? 52 letters, 12 letters, okay? Third year, we got them once a quarter, and then maybe 2 a year, and then I got my money back. That's true, and that's absolutely how that went. It was like 5 years later, and I basically got all my money back, which was, was awesome. But that simple effect, I can remember waking up in the middle of the night, like thinking, oh my gosh, where's my money? And thinking, oh, wait a minute, I just got a letter from Steve yesterday. And so even when the letters had really no updates, and the letters was like 3 lines, he just was making that communication happen, right? So I just like that discipline of that. So to me, it's like when I start thinking about if we have some tough times ahead, being ahead of that, thinking about resources, that kind of communication, really key. Make sense? Good? All right. Next one. So when I think about this, what I want to talk about for a second is measured growth. I'm a big pro-growth guy, right? So I just opened an office in Charlotte. So clearly I'm not that worried about the economy if I'm still growing, okay? I believe in growth, absolutely, but I'm about measured growth. So over the holidays, I got a gift from my friends at JP Morgan, and they gave me this book, Blitz Scaling. Anybody read this book? It's pretty popular, really well endorsed, gave me this book, Blitz Scaling. So at first it starts talking about what is blitz? Where does that come from? Well, the term comes from the Blitzkrieg. You guys know your history. In World War II, the Nazis had their lightning war. Blitzkrieg, it says, actually was phraseology from the British about what they were doing. But warfare, for centuries, this is how warfare worked. Troops would slowly advance. They'd bring their supply lines behind them, and then they'd advance some more. That's what they did. So the Nazis, and this is post-industrial revolution, what they did was they sent in planes and cars and tanks really, really, really fast, not worrying about the supply lines, and they would just completely overwhelm the enemy and then win battles, right? So that's where it comes from. Another context we might think is a blitz in a football game, right? So what's a blitz in a football game? Ray, you coach football, you could teach this part, right? You could talk about what is a blitz. Well, a blitz would be you send in a bunch of linebackers, strong safeties, and you just go up to the quarterback like crazy. So when a blitz works well, 15-yard loss, right? So what this book talks about is that's how you can kind of run your business, like blitz scaling, like ramp up and go crazy big. So like I just said open office in Charlotte. This book would say, John, open 6 more offices. Just overwhelm, just go in there in a big way. So you read it and you're like, man, that's really exciting. That's really cool. That's like really fun. And I'm like, great, great points. To which I would say, has anyone here heard of the Battle of Stalingrad? Yeah. Do you know the Battle of Stalingrad? Do we have pens up here? So let's do this real quick. So Stalingrad, okay? Stalingrad, the Battle of Stalingrad, for those who don't know, in my opinion, is maybe the most important battle in human history. That's how great it is. When people talk about World War II, they talk about D-Day. I think Stalingrad is way bigger than D-Day. I think the only thing compared to it would be the Battle of Midway. So from 1939 until 1942, the Nazis are doing their blitzkrieg and they're beating everybody. They're basically undefeated. They just wipe everybody out. So here on a map, just visualize that there is the city of Stalingrad. Pretty big deal, right? So in Stalingrad, you have, they're there, and here are all the Russians, and they're there. And they're getting attacked by the Nazis. And the Nazis come in, right? And slowly and slowly and slowly, they kind of push in there and push in there and push in there. There were buildings within Stalingrad that were taken 8 times. We'll go back and forth between the two. And they're doing their blitzkrieg and got it. So that all sounds good. And in fact, at the end, the Germans won. They actually won Stalingrad. Here's what they didn't know. While they were doing that, and they didn't have their supply line set up, the Russians then surrounded them this way, all the way around. The river was this way. So they were trapped. Now, conventional wisdom would have been that the Germans should have kind of split back out and reconnected. They didn't do that because they thought, we'll just drop in our supplies there. It was a disaster. And like 1 million dead soldiers later, the Nazis lost the Battle of Stalingrad. And by the way, after that, they basically lost every other battle to the Russians. So 1939, 1942, Nazis are basically undefeated. 42 to 45, they basically lost everything else, right? So that's kind of, they don't say that story in this book, by the way. It's just sort of funny to me, right? If you are up by 3 touchdowns in a game and the other team's trying to come back and you catch them off guard and you want to blitz and you get them good and you sack the quarterback for 15 yards, that could be the knife in the heart. But baby, if you're in the Super Bowl and you're playing Tom Brady and you're up by 3 and you try to do a blitz on Tom Brady, he will burn you bad, right? So if I was going to respond to this book, I would read a book called Genghis Khanning is the name of my book. I would respond to that. If you know about Genghis Khan was a great military leader, terrible human being, I might add, but a great military leader. And one of his really, really important battle ways he would do strategies was retreating. Genghis Khan would retreat. He'd come out, he started losing, check it out, he'd pull those little horses way, way back. You'd follow him and then he'd ambush you. But Genghis Khan didn't lose battles. And in great part because he pulled back. So I would just, let's not use the Nazis as our guide for growing our businesses would be my point. I'm teasing. I'm sure there's great things in there. I just would say that moderate growth, and I would say that having a retreat plan is a very healthy part of having a productive business. There's no pride and there's no ego in that. You know, I look at my business and other businesses, we try some things sometimes. Sometimes we try them and they go great. Sometimes they're disasters. So I like trying stuff, but pulling back can be absolutely key. One other just quick side note with that. I remember right before the Great Recession, I was doing some business with GE Capital. And a guy at GE Capital, his name was Brian, called me, said, you know, Crossman, the economy's going great, we should do some bigger deals together. And I was like, well, we can talk about that. He goes, what you need to do, this is what he said, Brian says to me, make up a deal, I'll get it approved, and then you could go find a deal. That's what he said to me. Now, I will tell you that GE Capital's not around anymore, and I don't know where Brian is, okay? And no, we did not make up a deal, right? So I come back to like solid, measured growth is the way I would just sort of advocate, all right? Next point I want to make. When I think about advice, this is just getting in shape. I learned about kettlebells recently. I was not a kettlebell guy, and I'm learning about kettlebells. But if you guys said to me, John, if you said you're 100% sure that there's going to be a big recession in 12 months, and we want your advice, what are something absolutes you would say do right now? Again, the obvious ones I'd say is like, put cash aside and reduce debt. Right. Here's another one I would say today. Hire a personal trainer. You go, what? Hire a personal trainer. I would get in the best physical shape of your life if you believe there's going to be a big recession in 12 months. 100%. And I would say work out. And I would say, by the way, based on our age group, my age group, I work out now regularly, but I don't do crazy stuff anymore. I don't worry about my 5K time. I don't worry about when I'm bench pressing. I just do kind of normal exercise. I exercise with my daughters a lot of times. And we do kind of like normal exercise, but I would get in good shape, okay? You know why? Because it fights off depression. It gives you more energy. If you want to be a high-functioning CEO, you need to have like really high energy. That's an important thing, right? And so having that is really key. I will jump this and say this to you that about 2.5 years ago, a dear friend of mine committed suicide. It was very tragic. I loved him very dearly. He committed suicide. His widow and I had stayed in close touch. In fact, his oldest son turned 18. I had dinner with his 8-year-old son Monday, which was wonderful and sad and beautiful and awful, but good. But she, the mom, just came out that she's got breast cancer. She's got stage 4 breast cancer. Sometimes people just get a bad hand in life. But I want you to think about this. Is there a correlation between her husband's suicide and her having cancer? I think so. And I think there's doctors that would agree with that. That the absolute stress that she was under leading up to that, dealing with that, though I think that could exacerbate someone having cancer, I think that's true. And so if we think, like right now, we can pay all our bills and no lenders are calling us, it's all good. If we think that's going to happen in 12 months, I talked earlier, one of my key things was coaching and mentoring, professional counseling, by the way. Like if I had an economic collapse right now, I have a counseling session on Saturday if I need it with a professional, right? That's there. So I'd say the same thing about that with exercise, okay? The other thing I'd say is I'd say drink plenty of water. I brought this in part because I need to drink while I'm speaking, but the other reason why I bring this, I try to drink one of these every day. It's 50 ounces. Sometimes people make fun of me. That's a big bottle of water. Well, here's my rule. This is just my rule. I don't drink anything else until I finish that. So like I love Coke. Sometimes they're Diet Coke. I can't remember what's worse for you, Coke or Diet Coke. They're both terrible, right? They're both terrible. But one of the rules I made for myself is I can't have a Coke until I finish that. And so I've sort of kept with that. I don't have anything until I finish that. Okay. So I do that just to kind of physically make sure. Sometimes I'll tell myself I can't go home from work until I finish this bottle. So it's like 5:15. I'm drink, like whatever, right? But drinking plenty of water. Most people are dehydrated. Most people don't have enough water in them. When my daughters ever tell me they have a headache, I say drink a bottle of water. They get anything they say, I say drink a bottle of water. I have to say that. But we know that about ourselves. Here's another one is sleep. Okay. One of the reasons why I wear a Fitbit is I monitor my sleep. Now, I have a very active brain. That's part of my process. I have a very hard time. I struggle being present. I struggle slowing down. I can remember a couple years ago watching the Super Bowl. My wife and I had a couple over to watch the Super Bowl with us, and I was doing paperwork while I was watching the Super Bowl. And the wife looked at me and she's like, "What are you doing?" But I have trouble with that. I have to really push myself to slow down. So I'd have trouble sometimes sleeping. But what helps me is when I do this, I monitor it, I am much more proactive about my sleep. One of the dumbest things that happens in life is when you're expecting your first baby and people say stupid things like, "Well, enjoy your sleep." Like how is that helpful advice? It's not. What I tell parents when they have a newborn, if they're in my world, I'm close to them, I say, you need to get your brain on sleep management. You have to be proactive with it. You can't just sleep. You gotta manage that out. Well, I will tell you that it's not uncommon for me when I'll monitor my sleep is I'll have multiple nights in a row where I sleep 5 hours. Okay, and when I watch that I'm only sleeping 5 hours a night, I'm programmatic about it. I put myself to bed earlier the next day so that I try to manage that. So I'm a guy that probably an average night I sleep about 6.5 hours. It's really hard for me to get to 7, and I feel like it's almost impossible for me to get to 8. So maybe my body is better at 6.5 and 7, but I absolutely know that if I'm at 5.5, I'm in trouble. And if I see a 5-15 hours, I'm in trouble. And so I'll make myself take a nap or whatever. But sleep management is key. And let me tell you this, when any kind of recessions hit, you can't work your way through them, right? Like some people will think, this recession's happening and I'm just going to work like on a treadmill and work. No, you're not. Like that's 100% not true. You're not going to get through it that way. You've got to get your rest so you're higher functioning, okay? Another thing I'd mention is being outside. I do think just being outside, exposure. My Great Dane. Have I mentioned my Great Dane before? My Valentine's Great Dane? One of the things that's really funny about my dog is I love this about her is like sometimes she's in the house, she'll just scratch the back door, you let her outside, and she walks outside and she just lies in the sun. And I'm like, you know, I don't know if she likes the heat, I don't know what it is about that, but this dog knows lying in the sun is a good thing, right? You know, it's good for all of us to spend some time walking outside in nature, observing things, breathing air. It's part of how we're made. So one of the other books I brought to mention to you is Creation Health. Everybody heard this book? This book was done by Florida Hospital, now Advent Hospital. This is required reading, I think, by all of their employees, and it was written by Des Cummings, who's a local guy. And so the acronym of Creation talks about all these things to have us live a healthy life. And you know, they've done studies about the healthiest groups of people around the world, and our friends, the Seventh-day Adventists, actually rank #1 as far as healthy living. And so they do all this stuff. Now, I tease them when I meet with them that bacon-wrapped anything is fantastic, okay? So we thank you. We agree to disagree on the bacon concept. But they really have a lot of stuff balanced here. So here's the thing with this book. I read this book every December, okay? December is a hard month. I had a meeting with the chief of police, who's now the sheriff, Sheriff Mina, and he and I were talking about suicide. And you know, suicides happen around our community all the time, very sad. December, they go way up. Why do they go way up in December? Man, the memory pull, the songs, the smells, the sights, people are happy, but it's, oh man, I miss my dad, or whatever. There's all these triggers. December, they spike up. The food, we're surrounded by junk food constantly in December, right? Like there's all these parties and things to eat. There's stress, we gotta buy presents and all this kind of stuff. So I read this book and I encourage my friends to read it because it reminds me of these basic healthy choices we need to do. One of them it talks about is environment. This sounds crazy, but I would tell you, if you think there's a recession in 12 months, clean your office. Purge. Clean it up. Purge it out. Like clean things up. Purge your house. Purge your car. Clean things up. When things are cleaner, when your environment that you're in is cleaner and more organized, your stress level goes down. That's a big deal. Again, so you're thinking, John, things are fine right now. Yeah, I know. This is one of the ways to prepare for it. And I think there's like, if you want like an easy read, again, I'm giving this away. I'm going to leave this here. And I have extra copies of this, but, and Florida Hospital will give these away as well. They're great about that. But a great, solid read I like. Another one I want to mention that if you haven't done this, sometimes I advise that I would push you, if I can push you. If you're not, see your physician every year. Get an annual physical every single year. You might say, well, John, I'm in great shape. Great. Get a physical every single year. You might say, well, I'm 29 years old. Don't care. Get a physical every single year. It gives a baseline. You get a physical every single year, and it gives a baseline. You're fine. Yeah, get a physical. And when you need to get a colonoscopy, get a colonoscopy. Do that. Absolutely. Get that done. Because if the recession hits, when it hits, and then you're having all this stress, and you go back to the doctor and they look at you and your weight's really up, or your blood pressure's up, your triglycerides are up, you know, whatever's like shooting through, you can talk about that, right? Now, another subject for another day, but in 2013, I'll show this up, I got diagnosed with clinical depression, which I was shocked when that happened to me. And I think that was probably onset by fatigue. But one of the things that happened was I saw my doctor, we worked that through, I took Klonopin and Zoloft for 1 year. For 1 year I did that. I saw a psychiatrist on top of that, and I got through it. And then I got off of them, okay? There is no shame in that. I just said that to everybody in this room. I've done interviews with Associated Press where I talk about that. You know, I'm just telling you, there's no shame in that. Seeing a counselor is a brave and strong thing to do. Seeing your doctor is a ridiculously responsible thing to do. And if you need to see a psychiatrist, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people take meds their whole life. There's nothing wrong. It's good. It's healthy. But again, you want to put yourself in position that you have your team together. One of my favorite analogies I always talk about is that if you play in the NFL, there's a 100% chance you're going to get injured. You know that? There's no way you can play a season in the NFL you're not going to get injured. Would you ever go play in an NFL team if they had no medical staff? Absolutely. It's ridiculous, okay? You've got to have a medical staff, right? So have a personal trainer or a buddy you go to the gym with, have your physician, have your counselor, have all that system in place because if you need it, you have it there. You know? By the way, I also have a good friend that's a prison chaplain. And you think, gosh, you ever tapped on that guy? Many times. Many times I've had a friend call me and say, man, my kid got arrested and there's someone's in jail. What do you do? Well, I got guys on the inside, so I do that. It's good to have contacts. When you have a great attorney, you have a great accountant, great doctor, great support. That all make sense? Okay. All right. I'll keep going here. Be visible. That's just one of the favorite ones. When a recession hits, doubling down on being visible. Okay? A lot of times when recessions hit, people get so busy, they start not going to conferences. They kind of go underground, and then it makes it way worse. So my buddy that had the big high-profile job, and he got laid off 10 days ago, this is the coolest thing. The first thing he did, he posted on LinkedIn. He posted on LinkedIn, I'm no longer at this company, and I'm looking for a job. And I thought, man, how cool is that? Like, way to go. He just went way out there. And social media blew up with it. I had people screenshot and text me, can you believe I couldn't believe it. I called him, and we were talking about it. I said, tell me this. I said, how do you feel about all this? And so he said, well, at first I was kind of embarrassed, but then I just kind of went for it, and I just put it out there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, there's a major real estate conference today in Tampa. I'm not at that. Why? Because I'm here. But you know who's there? He is. He's from Indiana, and he's down at that conference. He's unemployed and at a conference. Why? He's being visible. He's just being out there. So to me, I'm like, keep going to stuff. Keep networking. Be visible. Keep posting on LinkedIn. Write articles. Set up time to be visible. If you're in insurance and you got laid off, sit down and write an article that's top 5 things people need to know about insurance. Write it, post it on LinkedIn, and put it out there. Challenge yourself to put some post or whatever. And get yourself in that rhythm right now to be visible, okay? I always think about like, whatever you can do to be an expert on it. If somebody just said to me, John, tell me what's been the key secret to your success in business, I would say that fundamental one is like showing up with a good attitude. And I would tell you, like, sometimes people say, man, you're in the media a lot. How are you in the media a lot? I show up a lot. I mean, first off, when media calls me, I call them back. And then secondly, I'm always trying to be aware if the media needs information, right? You can study editorial calendars. You can study them for different OBJ, every kind of things, and you can reach out to them and say, hey, I see that your editorial calendar, you're going to do a spotlight on banking, and I'm in banking, and I just wrote this little article about keys to have a better relationship with your banker, and put that out there. Is that cool? So be in front of it, okay? How am I doing on time, by the way? Am I okay?
About 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll go fast. This is one of my favorite ones. Circle up key relationships. Circle up key relationships. Now, I will tell you that there's some obvious components of that. It's like people would say in a cliche way, your family, absolutely. People you work with, absolutely. Clients, absolutely. But let me just dig that just a tiny bit deeper, okay? Sometimes people, again, in a cliche will say, well, your family is the most important thing. Yeah, except if you're married to a drug addict, or if your kid's an alcoholic, or if you've got a business partner that has a mental health issue. And in that scenario, and I'm not saying you get rid of them, but sometimes some family members are toxic. And sometimes you need to augment that and have different relationships. Sometimes there's different skill sets you need to have on board. Sometimes you have closer to your family, and you need some good friends who can help you take care of some different issues. Okay? So absolutely, you need to have these tight relationships. I always say that my biggest regret in business is too much time in bad relationships and not enough time in good relationships. So you got to keep pushing into the healthy ones. But you also got to be aware of like which ones can help give you tools. Sometimes when we're looking at a problem, I've thought to myself, I feel like I got a sink that's spewing out water, and my toolbox is empty, and who around me has a full toolbox? My brother's my business partner. We were raised in the same household, so his toolbox might be empty too. That's why you need to go to some of the people who have the tools. So to think about who you circle up with, those right relationships, that's absolutely key. When my dad passed away in 2004, I would have thought that I had a pretty good circle of friends, and I kind of did, but I was kind of stunned at the volume of them that really weren't ready for that. Maybe I had a lot of younger friends, and I would have done better to have some older friends who had been through that life experience. And by the way, there's lots of people who have been through bankruptcy, been through divorce, been through addiction, that you can go and talk to. And they might not look like the person you think you should be doing. We all think, gosh, wouldn't it be great if Bill Gates was like our business advisor? Well, would you believe Bill Gates may not have the tools for what you need? And there may be somebody that's a blue-collar or working-class person that doesn't look like a super business success. They may absolutely have the tools that you need. My daughter did a project where she wanted to make food for the homeless. And so she did the project, was full of community hours. And so we were trying to figure out where to give the food. And so I emailed a bunch of pastors and she emailed a bunch of pastors, and we got no responses or like bad responses. I texted a friend of mine who's a cab driver. He's from the Bronx. He's like just a regular guy. And 5 minutes later, he said, John, there's a place 10 minutes from your house. It's a recovery center for men. They'd love to have your sandwiches. That guy got the job done. It's different people, okay? Build skill sets. And what I'm talking about there is just a continuation of like trying to be thoughtful what skill sets you don't have and building them. And I'm going to give you a weird one to think about, and that is this one. There's a book called Voice of the Heart. And people ask me to tell my books that influenced me. Actually, the study guide and the videos really influenced me. And it's just a book that really teaches about feelings. And so we were talking about this the other day. You were talking about this, the feeling, it's stressed. And I was saying to you, like, what's a different word? And you said overwhelmed, right? So, I don't like the word stressed. I don't like the word good. Like, I like to get to deeper words. So that study taught me a lot about feelings and be able to talk in a feeling context. If we have a big recession, feelings will become an important part of that, and learning how to talk in that language. So sometimes skill sets might be learning technology, it might be learning more about social media, it might be learning more about public speaking, but it might be really soft skills and learning about feelings. So that's part of that, like, don't be afraid to learn the skill sets. And again, you'd rather be learning that skill set now than later. This is just a slide I want to talk about real quick. It's HR and turnover. When you have those tough times come up, and if you've got to do layoffs, do them early and do them fast. Okay? Super, super, super hard, but you got to get in front of that. Don't try to trim the tail of the dog 1 inch at a time. Get in front of that and trim it down. So be ready for that. Start thinking like, what would that look like? The other hand is that you're going to need to hire people, on your onboarding process. So really spending time with HR and thinking what would that look like on a ramp up and ramp down is really key, because you're going to have your arms around that. If you're not ready for that, what that might look like, I would really think of that through. This slide is having the talk. That's a father and son having the talk, right? And so what I like to say about this is that in my company, what I'm trying to encourage is having difficult conversations clearly and gently, right? I want to tell you a story. I'm about to wrap up. I know I'm out of time, but I want to tell you a story. So I have a friend, and my friend and his wife, she's a counselor, he's a business guy, and they have another friend, this other couple. The other couple, so not my friend, this other couple. Nice couple, married, 3 kids, and as the wife tells the story that she felt like, sexually her husband wasn't satisfying with her in the bed, so she went and had an affair, okay? And so then he, obviously there was some disconnect there, he had an affair, and then he filed for divorce, and she was mad about that. That was sort of interesting. So my friend's telling me this entire story, and I'm listening to this, and I was, a couple days later, I was driving the car, I was thinking about, gosh, that story really bothers me. It really bothers me. And here's what bothers me about it is, man, if you're married and you've got 3 kids and you're sexually not compatible, that is super awkward. And that is super weird and uncomfortable. But here's the deal. It's worthy to work on that. And there are resources out there. There is counseling. There's books. There's videos. There's a world of resources you could go get. And I'm sure, oh my gosh, it's so weird and uncomfortable. But it's worthy. And you work on it, okay? So I have a brother, and my brother and I are business partners, and so some issues we're working on, it's weird and it's awkward, it's hard. He's my big brother, he's 9 years older, and that's complicated. So what did I do? I brought in Ray. I had Ray and I met, Ray and my brother met, and then the next thing comes, Ray and me and my brother are going to meet. And somebody might say, man, like that's weird. You've been brothers a long time. Yes, we have, right? Most of my life. That's weird. It's worthy. It's worthy. And I will tell you that if you're getting towards having a recession and you think about tough times, you need to think about what's worthy and get ready having deep, real, awkward conversations. Last couple things. Cash, obviously we talk about cash is king, but there's one thing I would say about that just to think about is that I would dive in and say this. All the obvious stuff about money, what and who are your banking relationships? I did this yesterday. My brother and I were talking about this. We use 9 different banks for all our different accounts, 9 different banks. And if I'm honest with you, only one of them I feel like I'm close to, of the 9. And I started thinking about that. You know what? I probably need 9 for 9 to know them. I need to know these people. And I need to spend a little bit of time knowing who these people are. It's not a ton, but to me it's like the obvious thing about cash, yeah, but it's the banking relationships and making sure that they know you and you know them. Because I'm telling you, when things go bad, you do not want to be trying to get really close to your banker at that moment. That doesn't come across well. But if you're building towards it, right, it's a good thing. All right? Last couple things. You guys all know the story of Walt Disney. And you remember that he was working for a studio and he had a really famous rabbit. Do you guys know about that? Do you guys know that story? So Walt Disney had a rabbit, a cartoon rabbit. And it was a big deal. It was really successful. But the short version of the story is that he got fired. And he had no copyright to the rabbit. And so he was out of a job. And so he was taking a train and trying to think what was next in his life, and he was just doodling, and he doodled Mickey Mouse. Okay? That's a true, you look it up, that is a true story. That's what happened to him, right? And if you're wondering, why is Disney so sensitive about copywriting? That'd be why. It's cultural. It's core part of it. So through any tough time, innovation comes, right? Had Walt never gotten laid off, everyone in this room would not be enjoying a lot of things we enjoy right now. His layoff created that. If you study Sam Walton in Walmart, Sam Walton was a Ben Franklin franchisee, and he didn't have an option in his lease. His lease expired, and the landlord took over his space and took over Ben Franklin. That's where Walmart came from. Okay? We can see that over and over and over again, greatness and innovation comes out of tough times. Okay? So this is hard, but I would tell you, if when we hit the next recession, what if we just went and kissed it right on the lips and said, hey, all right, we're going to go through this. We don't have to go through it alone. We don't have to go through it alone. And let me just say this. If you find yourself in a dark place, call somebody. If you don't know who to call me. I'll get you in touch with somebody. And if you be aware that if there's people around you going through tough times, make sure you have the resources for them as well. Okay? This is my contact information. And I brought these copies. This book. Blitzscaling was for you, by the way. You asked for that, so that is for you. But I'm going to leave these books here for you guys, and we can have that. And if you can't find any of those books, if you want to get it, can't find it, just email me, and I actually know both those authors. Get in touch, and I know that author too. So I'll leave those good for you guys. So with that, any questions or anything we want to talk about?
Yes, a question or two, John?
We're talking about Battle of Stalingrad. I could keep going about that. It's super fun.
All right, John, thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for